Hey everybody, thanks for coming to the VMware booth and joining myself, Jake Bogie, and my colleague and friend Ryan Niksch.
Hi, Ryan Niksch. I'm a partner solutions architect with Amazon Web Services. I focus on application platforms and hybrid solutions.
And I work for Pivotal, and what I do is I basically enable our customers to leverage the AWS cloud with the Pivotal platform as the substrate that they do so with. So Ryan and I basically said, you know what? We're going to have an impromptu conversation with a couple of slides kicking around. The idea is to give everybody kind of an idea of what's happening when customers want to leverage native AWS services in the Pivotal platform, and what are kind of some of the challenges that you've seen customers dealing with that have led them towards using the Pivotal platform and AWS native services, and what are some of the outcomes that folks are seeing?
And this is definitely part of a large modernization theme that we're seeing in the industry. You know, every customer's going through the same journey, and they're getting to these challenges, these building steps at different phases. And I think it's a great segue to look at what are the challenges themselves, what are people tripping over.
So, having worked with a bunch of organizations over the past year and a half, I kind of came up with this sense that, you know, folks that are taking their first step out to the cloud from running services on-prem are really kind of bewildered by the amount of choice that they've got for the different types of services that they can consume, the different ways they can actually consume them and leverage them. And it even gets more interesting when they start wanting to do a multi-cloud strategy across all the different cloud providers.
Correct, and if you, even not just the clouds, you're starting to look at multiple on-premise vendors, you've got multiple ways of cannibalizing your traditional monolithic architectures. Choice is a significant blocker here. Yep. And when I talk to a customer, when they're coming to me, they're saying, I want to modernize my business, a lot of the guidance is around how do I change this at various different layers, whether it's my developers, whether it's my operations, whether it's my infrastructure, and they're looking for a prescriptive manner of going through all of those steps.
Yep. So Ryan hits on a really good point, which is, in a lot of cases, organizations are kind of looking at the technology itself as kind of being the solution, when really the development community and the products that those developers are maintaining and delivering are the pieces of influence that'll really help a business transform. So we want to maintain velocity with our customers. We want to help them consume cloud services. We also want to help them deliver product and outcome to their customers. And in doing so, we want to kind of limit the amount of risk and governance overhead that they're having to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So that might even be things like, how am I handling credentials? How are different development communities inside of my organization maintaining compliance? And
I mean, coming back to your comment around agility, most of my customers are looking at how do I get my developers agilely building applications, but then they slow down when we get to the operational side of infrastructure. Do I have a cloud team that builds out my cloud environment? Do I have a separate securities team that wants to scrutinize things from a compliance perspective, if this is a financial institution, for example? And you can't get to the degree of agility that we're looking at unless you have it at all of those layers.
Yeah. So we believe that there's a way that organizations can actually leverage both native cloud services and the Pivotal platform to be able to maintain that velocity. So give the developers what they need, the services they want to consume, and also do it in a way that reduces that risk and makes the ops teams more efficient, but also more responsive to what the business and what those development teams need in a more, fluid nature.
No, absolutely. I think let's dig into this opportunity here, and we're going to run through it in various different layers. We'll have a look at the developer first, and what does Pivotal, specifically the Cloud Foundry implementation, bring into that picture in terms of developers and operations, and then take a secondary modernization step and have a look at how application architectures and AWS native services are combining to expand and augment that.
Yeah, way cool. So earlier this morning, we had a session that was all around the platform and how the platform itself is helping customers consume the cloud in a more easier and efficient manner. And one of the things that we touched on was there's a lot of focus on actually building platforms inside of organizations, when really what drives value towards your customers and your business is actually focusing on the applications that your development teams are delivering and iterating upon. So we try to look at what is the best way of enabling those developers, whether it be through tooling or whether it be through teaching them different ways of consuming services. And we do it in a way that through our partnership, AWS and Pivotal, we've actually created a service broker that goes and takes cloud services that are native to AWS, 26 of them, actually, if I remember correctly.
26, and that's an overlap. What we did is we reached out to various customers and we said, what are you using as building blocks in your applications? And what came back consistently was database solutions, NoSQL environments, caching layers, messaging and queuing components, encryption, key management, all of these little nitty-gritties. And these customers were building these out. Many of them were containerizing them, running them inside various platforms, but it meant that the customer was responsible for, whether that component was functional, whether it had the required storage, they had to scale it, they had to monitor the health of it.
Was it secure?
Security. Some customers actually came to us and said it was missing components and we need to enable or mobilize development teams to build out the components that weren't there. And the customers came back to us and said, I don't want to do this. I'm going to focus on my line of business applications that are meaningful to my downline customer, and I want something that I can consume. I want something that's going to scale for me. I want somebody else to do the dirty work. So how do I build meaningful microservices inside Pivotal, but take advantage of something like a relational database managed by Amazon Web Services, or a DynamoDB table, or a caching layer? How do I firstly provision these? How do I integrate them with my applications? How do I really take advantage of the cloud but not lose that developer-centric acceleration that I'm getting from my application platform?
And we at Pivotal love to do things in a secure by default manner. So what we said was, let's take a look at what a typical customer will undertake when they want to build a platform on top of like AWS or any of the other clouds. And what are those pieces and components that they have to marry together and build together to actually have a functional platform just to run an application on top of?
Correct. And what I love about this is we've had a lot of discussions around people saying, I want to build my own platform. And when you have a look at all of these components and you look at what are we really talking about, building your own platform, it's a little bit insane. It doesn't bring value to my customer for me to invest time, effort, and money into building out all of this. I'd rather sort of spend some money and get a turnkey solution out of the box and get up and running so I can focus on building my own applications. But what I think is important to illustrate here is this is not just the platform itself. If you have a look on the corner, we're talking about the platform managing my cloud environment. So it's building out things such as, the VPC. It's building out my auto-scaling. It's building out my IAM.
Routing. It's building out your security. It's building out a whole bunch of different pieces that you would normally have to manually learn yourself or build a team to learn and manage.
And through that we get acceleration of familiarity. I've got the exact same process on premises as well as on the cloud. And this is not just building out and provisioning on day one. This is an ongoing operational benefit. If I have the need to scale up my infrastructure, the platform itself does that for me. But more interesting to me is not the platform and not the underlying infrastructure as a service component. What's more interesting to me is when I build applications and run them inside this platform, what are the additional components that my application's consuming? Those services that I'm touching. Typically these would be databases, storage systems, and a plethora of other things. So I had customers coming to me and saying, now do I need to hat swap? Do I need to go and log out of my Pivotal environment, go to an AWS console, log in there, deal with a different process, deal with a different interface, or can I simply do this the same way I'm building all of my other applications? So if I'm doing a CF push to push my application in, could I do a CF create service to build out an AWS resource, for example?
And give those developers and give those teams the autonomy of having a catalog of services, whether they be brokered directly from the native cloud or whether they be on-premise. Give them that autonomy to say, I know what type of service plans I can budget for inside of my application development budget. why don't I consume those services and do it in a way where they're self-service? I mean, if we look at kind of that DIY platform, that slide that we just had up a moment ago, there was a lot of components, and what we've done is really said, okay, we're going to abstract out quite a bit of the operational components that you would typically build a platform with. And then we're going to put on top of it what we would say is kind of like a dial tone, or the abstraction layer that your development teams interact with. So pushing code directly to a platform, pushing containers directly to a platform. And Ryan, really, it's like this whole area on the left that we're talking about with an open service broker that gives us that opportunity to say, hey, I've got 26 native services in AWS that I can now hand over to anybody that's leveraging this platform.
And I think there's a couple of things to point out here. And, there are many ways to skin a cat, but really what we're talking about is a very prescriptive manner for a developer through the interface that they're familiar with, that they work in every day, to build out an AWS service in a prescriptive manner. They don't need to go and learn all of the dials and knobs. We worked with the service teams, we worked with the product teams, we worked with the well-architected framework teams, we worked with customers that are deploying these to see, if you're deploying a database, for example, what is the best way to deploy a database in a production context? And we've built that in terms of parameterized format. So my developer doesn't have to know all of those knobs and dials. They simply go and say, I want to create a database. It's going to be MySQL, it's going to be Oracle, it's going to be SQL Server, and I want it for a production workload. And this system then builds it out for them. They absolutely have the ability to override that, but there is a significantly reduced learning curve, and they're doing it within a familiar platform. So I don't change my process.
Yep.
I did have a couple of security people come up to me and say, right, are we unleashing my developers into AWS in an uncontrolled fashion? Am I going to get a bill that's going to come and consume me? No. So what we did is, from a securities perspective, is give the platform the ability to interact with the services, and through the role-based access control inside Cloud Foundry, have the developers interact with the broker. So the broker has permissions, not the individual human being. And the other thing that we did is we took advantage of all of the control mechanisms inside Cloud Foundry. So all of those organizations, those spaces that you're using for tracking your applications, and we've embedded those into the tagging mechanisms. So when you get your AWS bill at the end of the month, or even if you're looking at it on a day-to-day ongoing basis, you can clearly see which workloads these resources relate to, and you can do chargeback functions, you can do cost tracking, you can see where your business is actually going, even though you're empowering the development team outright.
Yeah. So we're going to skip this next slide because it's kind of redundant to some of the stuff that we've already talked about.
Yeah, I think we've kind of jumped over a lot of it already.
But one thing to think about is we want to shift the focus from building platforms to actually delivering value. And kind of the easiest way to think about that is we've got what we call these lines of delineation, the value lines. And those value lines are really, what are the containers that I'm able to push to the platform? What is the code that I'm able to push to the platform? And what are the functions that I'm able to push to the platform? That's really where organizations should be spending their time and their focus, is how do I iterate upon those valuable items that I'm creating, and not the pieces and components that actually make up the platform. But what gets really interesting is we've been talking quite a bit about the service broker, and it's a common theme for developers to want to have their own way of consuming those services, no matter what type of application or what type of container they're pushing. So I thought it'd be kind of cool if we walk everybody through what we've got, what we're doing, and how a developer would interact with the service broker itself, and kind of some of the different nuances that people will see.
Right. So first things to call out is let's have a look at some of these building blocks. As I said, we've got a cross-section of various service components, and these were fished out of customer interaction. So no-brainer, databases are there, no SQL storage system. A lot of customers are transitioning to object storage platforms, so S3 as an AWS service became attractive, and I don't want to have to go and step outside and build a bucket and then go and configure my application to interact with that bucket. AI/ML sort of cropped into the woodwork work quite quickly, so a lot of machine learning. So we saw things like object recognition, text-to-speech, speech-to-text, SageMaker as a learning algorithm for my data sciences team, key management, so AWS KMS services coming into the picture there as well. And these were the 18 sort of day one services. We even had Route 53 from a networking perspective, which enabled developers to build an application on AWS and then go and configure the networking around, how does my downline client get to that? What we then did is we took a step further and we added in additional services, and these were things such as Cognito for authentication with microservices. We added in additional database languages to get us in line with some of the financial institutions, so a lot of requests around Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, very important for those customers who are transitioning .NET workloads into the cloud.
Yep.
We also saw Elasticsearch, Elastic Cache, as layers coming into those applications. And all of these are provisioned through the broker, managed through the broker. And in terms of a developer experience, it literally is as simple as within Cloud Foundry going and saying, I want to create a service, so CF create service. What is the name of that service? If we had to look at SQS, for example, literally AWS SQS. And then there are certain plans. So is this a first in, first out SQS queue? Is this a standard queue? Is this a production RDS database? And my developer can pick from those plans, and then it builds out that resource. So it out-of-band provision it using infrastructure as code into the AWS account. And once that resource is up and running in AWS, the broker itself passes all of the information needed to consume that resource back to Cloud Foundry. And we store the information, endpoints, usernames, passwords, port numbers, anything that is needed to consume that resource inside Cloud Foundry's VCAP services. And what this means is a developer doesn't need to go and take the environment variables in their app and go and add in pieces of information such as usernames and passwords. They can simply go through a binding process and say, take these environment variables and get the answers to them out of VCAP services inside the platform. So the two things I like about this is you can programmatically do this as part of your pipelines. You can automate this build out my front-end application and consumption process. And at no point in time does a human being, such as a developer, walk around the business knowing things like usernames, passwords, so on and so forth. They're completely abstracted from that. And it speeds up the process significantly. I'm not begging a cloud team or an infrastructure team to go and stand this up, wait for them to finish, and then them to provide me with the information. My developers going through this themselves.
Yep. One of the really interesting things that I found with kind of how this whole solution was architected and delivered out to our customers was with that credential management and the way that we're actually storing and passing the credentials back and forth between the platform and the services, it enables security teams and even operation teams to rotate those passwords just by unbinding and rebinding the applications to those services.
Correct.
So,
and the security footprint goes further. I mean, security teams actually have the ability to scrutinize these infrastructure as code templates for these services, make them their own. So, for example, it's an open source project. You can go into the Git repository, you can look at how those services are built out, and a security team can say, well, that's not quite how we do it within our business. We're going to change it, and I'll simply use my own template, and you've got a reusable building block that accelerates developers and operations teams within the business, as well as meeting your overall compliance requirements, whether that's internal or regulatory.
Yep. It is a community project, so right now the service broker itself is being curated and developed by the AWS Labs team. However, it's open for PRs, so please, if you see changes that you'd like to make, if you'd like to contribute to the project, absolutely go out to GitHub, sign up, help contribute. This is a community project, so the best way to get this tailored to what you want and what you need is by being active inside of that community. We're also taking through the issues and through the requests new services that folks are looking to leverage inside of the service broker. And really, if you contribute to the community through feedback, that's where we will know and you will have the opportunity to voice where this project goes and how we evolve it.
The fun thing is through contributing to the project, you get to make it your own. But if that's not appealing to you, I do have some customers that are just going there and saying, here are some things that are really important to us. Here are elements of feedback. Cut those issues. We are constantly evolving the broker itself as well as the plans to meet what is changing within our customer environment. That customer feedback is incredibly important to AWS as well as pivotal in terms of making sure we're delivering what's important to the customer and helping you get to where you want to be in an agile way.
So I think to wrap up, really, the idea is we've got a whole host of services that are out there living inside of AWS, and we're able to take those services, 26 of them, right now, good start.
At this stage, and it certainly doesn't stop there.
We're able to take those services, broker them in, and deliver them to application development teams through the platform, whether it be for their containers, their functions, or directly for the applications that they're pushing to the platform. And more than anything, it's a community-driven project where you've got the ability to take this service broker, deploy this service broker into the Pivotal platform, but also be a part of the community that's helped driving where that platform, where that broker's going.
Yeah. I think the most consistent feedback we've gotten from the industry is modernization of my business does not stop by breaking down monoliths. It continues all the way through. I'm continuously coming back and looking at the applications and how I can evolve those. And those AWS services are certainly one step in that journey. Thank you very much for joining us. Jake, as always, a pleasure to sort of co-present with you.
Same, Ron. And thanks for coming, guys.